Is our reality real? What is real? Many people are starting to realize we live in a simulation. This is reflected in the fact that everything has an underlying mathematical component to it, which can be computed and simulated. In an online paper by Mahmoud Nafusi titled "The Binary Universe and Simulated Reality," the author states that the space-time matrix represents a universal computational platform in which the universe gets manifested. In other words, the fabric of reality, space and time, is a sort of computer in which we emerge through as beings of simulated light. Another excerpt from this article claims that when we paint a picture or model a three-dimensional object using computer software, all the instructions are processed by the CPU and its counterparts before they are projected onto the screen. This process happens almost instantaneously, and it shows that instructions are processed by the CPU before they are used to create the computer-generated object. In a sense, our picture or three-dimensional model is nothing more than a perception of the CPU. If we look at the computer from the outside, our artwork looks solid. If we take apart the outside layers of the computer and watch it in slow motion, how its hardware works beyond the microscopic level, we will see that it is made up of vast streams of electrical currents. Electrical currents are another form of energy. At this level, our artwork will look like flashes of electrical currents. This analogy of how a computer works is similar to how our minds and consciousness create our illusionary external reality. Again, everything is mostly just light that is assembled into subatomic particles, which then follow the natural laws and commands from the mainframe of our universe to in turn project the visible moving reality. This is an intricate process that our consciousness receives as a program, which is then uploaded into the brain, our computer, and thus we exist. Math seems to be the language of the universe, and although everything around us seems chaotic and random, when we take a deeper look, we find that it's all predictable, cyclical, and can be calculated. In a different online article posted by Scientific American titled "Are We Living in a Computer Simulation?" by Clara Moskowitz, we learn from a world-renowned physicist, James Gates, that as he got deep into his studies of the fabric of reality via subatomic particles, that he kept finding codes within the basis of our reality. As he stated, "I was driven to error-correcting codes. They're what make browsers work. So why were they in the equations I was studying about quarks and electrons and supersymmetry?" This brought me to the stark realization that I could no longer say people like Max are crazy. It seems as if all we know when broken down acts as a simple binary code that is processed and then turned into a fancy, complex, and illusory projection that we call reality. As Galileo stated, mathematics is the alphabet with which God has written the universe. What is the universe? What do we live in? Well, the purpose of this essay here is to unravel the intense document that has been called Project Gateway. This declassified document is a summary of the CIA's understanding of some research done by the Monroe Institute, which concludes that we live in a holographic universe and our minds can interact and manipulate it. The summary put together by the CIA sheds light on these questions about reality in a practical way, gleaming from an online article produced on Vice.com by Thoby Campion titled "How to Escape the Confines of Time and Space According to the CIA." We can get a brief timeline of how this document came to be. It all starts in the 1950s with Robert Monroe, a radio executive who began to conduct experiments with specific sound patterns, which proved to have effects on the human psyche. He later formed an organization called RAM Enterprises, in which he conducted further sound experiments specified on the mind in its sleeping state. Through these experiments, he discovered a strange phenomenon that led to an out-of-body experience. In 1962, he moved his organization to Virginia and eventually renamed it the Monroe Institute. This newly found institute began selling cassette tapes on how to achieve this out-of-body experience. In the 70s, Monroe began to register several patents for his work. The crown model of his work was then called Hemi-Sync, which is short for hemisphere synchronization. This is a term for a state in which both hemispheres of the brain are in sync with each other, which create the potential for some metaphysically powerful abilities. On June 9, 1983, the CIA produced a report on the Monroe Institute's theories and work titled Analysis and Assessment of the Gateway Process. Within this report, Lieutenant Colonel Wayne M. McDonnell is commissioned to write up a summary and conclusion on the mind's supernatural abilities in relation to Monroe's work. He describes Monroe's methods and gives some startling conclusions on the nature of reality. He also gives credit to the mystics of our past, who he says have had these supernatural powers and have been passing them down to us through the form of symbols, mythology, and religious tradition. They were right all along. Now, I'd like to introduce you to the actual contents of the Gateway Project. We'll be taking a paced journey through my highlighted notes of the document, unraveling the meaning and potential for what is stated. The paper itself is only 30 pages, but is packed with dense and unremarkably significant information. I advise you to eventually read the whole document when you get a chance to have a full, in-depth understanding of it. However, I'll be doing my best to bring you some amazing bits from the document to pass its power on to you. Part 1. Various Meditation Techniques. McDonnell briefly explains in the beginning of the paper that he sought out help to understand the complexity of what he was studying. He utilized Itzhak Bentov to create models of how the biomedical processes could be possible. Bentov was a genius Israeli-American scientist, inventor, and mystic. He helped pioneer the medical engineering industry. McDonnell also studied numerous sources on quantum mechanics so that he could explain the functions of human consciousness. As he states, I had to be able to construct a scientifically valid and reasonably lucid model of how consciousness functions under the influence of the brain hemisphere synchronization technique employed by Gateway, end quote. He also studied theoretical physics to understand the time-space dimension so that he could use physics to bring the whole phenomenon of out-of-body states into the language of physical science to remove the stigma of its occult connotations. It was important to McDonnell to make this report as scientific and practical as possible without employing vague or subjective opinion. He does say that although he tried to avoid speaking on the subject through an abstract way, he did find it necessary to compare his findings in the end with that of ancient sacred beliefs. As we will see, the gateway methods of expanding consciousness correspond to those expressed by ancient mystic traditions. McDonnell finds it necessary to clarify various known techniques of consciousness manipulation and expansion so that the reader can better understand the profound implications of the gateway ability. He also defines certain terms with which the gateway experience is to be understood. The gateway experience, as McDonnell calls it, is the term for the varying techniques that can be used to achieve an expansion of consciousness. The first term he explains is that of hypnosis. Hypnosis is the accessing of the right side of the brain or hemisphere by the acquisition of the left brain. It is the left brain that processes information and screens it to organize and assign logical meaning to it. We primarily use the left brain in our day-to-day work environments. It is the overseer of our reality. One must put the left brain into hypnosis if they seek to pass unchecked information into the right hemisphere. The right brain is our creative, abstract, and dreaming self. The right brain seems to accept whatever the left gives it without question. If the left brain can be put into a hypnotic state, reducing it to a semi-sleep state, then hypnotic suggestions or subliminal messages can be passed to the right brain, wherein the brain will act upon those commands. Transcendental meditation. This is a technique of intense focusing on the energy that moves up the spinal cord, which will eventually create acoustical standing waves. These waves will make their way up to the gray matter in the cerebral cortex of the right brain, which will produce a vibration all throughout the body, shooting it upward from the toes on. The general view of transcendental meditation is the usage of a mantra or a vibratory hum in repetition to achieve a harmonious relaxation throughout the body, which can unlock an expanded awareness. This has been taught within yoga for many years and was brought to the United States in 1959 by Indian-born guru Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. Kundalini psychosis or transcendence. When practicing transcendental meditation and creating harmonious vibratory patterns throughout the body, these waves can create some intense sensations in the brain. Some of these include orgasmic feelings. This can also be induced by being exposed to low hertz within the range of 4 to 7 cycles per second. Kundalini yoga has a mythical origin that some date back as far as 3,000 years. We see substantial evidence for Kundalini yoga originating in sacred Indian writings, primarily the Vedic collection of writings known as the Upanishads. Kundalini was a science of energy and spiritual philosophy involving what are known as chakras. The body has 7 chakras, which are energy centers within the nervous system. At the base of our chakra system, the Muladhara chakra, we have what is known as a coiled serpent or a dormant spiral of energy. When awakened through Kundalini yoga, this orb of energy is then shot up through the chakra system to the brain and outward, resonating and producing heightened sensations. Biofeedback. Biofeedback teaches the left hemisphere first to visualize the desired result and then to recognize the feelings associated with the experience of successful right hemisphere access to the specific lower cerebral cortex, pain or pleasure, or other areas in the manner needed to produce the desired result. In other words, this technique is used to train the mind, specifically the left brain, to recognize the natural processes that would normally take place in the body and try to produce those processes at will. An example of this would be becoming aware of your heartbeat and being able to slow it down at will in order to produce a relaxed and calm body in a stressful situation. In theory, a master of this technique could use it to produce healing properties at will. Gateway and Hemi-Sync. As McDonald puts it, the gateway experience is a training system designed to bring a coherent output of brainwave patterns between the left and right so as to shift consciousness outside of the body, thus exiting the time-space dimension. McDonald states that studies conducted by Elmer and Alice Green at the Menninger Foundation have shown that a subject within 20 years of training in Zen meditation could consistently establish Hemi-Sync at will, sustaining it for over 15 minutes. This is fascinating because it appears that the ancients knew about this process, and although they didn't have the Monroe Institute with its apparatuses to come to this conclusion and result, they were able to do so naturally. McDonald compares the mind to a lamp and explains that just like a lamp, it exudes energy in the form of both heat and light. This lamp or mind could be turned into a laser, which then becomes a disciplined stream of light with extreme possibilities. Frequency following response. This technique employs the brain's innate response to mimic wave patterns. If the brain hears a theta wave, it will then transform and align itself with that wave. A theta wave is the same wave we produce in our sleep state. So, if a person is awake but is hit with a theta wave, they will progress into a sleep state. Since we cannot hear a theta wave, practitioners of the gateway experience must produce them another way. A clever way of doing this is also using the brain's default process of beat frequencies. This phenomenon is when one frequency is played on the left ear while another one at a slightly higher frequency is heard on the right. The brain will pick up the difference between the 2 hertz. For example, a frequency of 100 hertz could be played on the left and 104 hertz could be played on the right. Thus, the brain would also hear the 4 hertz difference. Along with these inaudible frequencies, subliminal messages could be snuck in. This method is widely used in the medical field today to help soothe anxiety and stress. Most brainwave patterns operate on a very low frequency, so using this method to create delta or theta waves can induce a relaxed sleep state. For the use of the gateway experience, this would be used to coalesce the brain to gain access into the right brain and eventually command an expansion of consciousness. Role of resonance. It is known within the medical field that our heart produces a vibration due to its rudimentary beat. This beat travels down the nervous system and fluid cavities, and before it splits to our legs, it rebounds and travels back up where it collides with another pulse. This disruption is called the bifurcation echo. The goal with meditation is to slow the heartbeat to eliminate this disruptive echo and create a rhythmic, synchronous vibration which results in a hum within the body, a steady frequency. As McDonald put it, the result is a regular, rhythmic sine wave pattern of sound which echoes throughout the body and rises up into the head in sustained resonance. The amplitude of this sine wave pattern, when measured with a sensitive seismograph type instrument, is about 3 times the average sound volume produced by the heart when it is operating normally. Brain stimulation. After meditating and creating a harmonious rhythm within the body, these vibrations start to produce an electromagnetic pulse in the brain. This in effect starts to amplify the brainwave output. It turns up the volume and intensity of the human brainwave. Surrounding the brain is a tight membrane called the dura, which is cushioned by a thin layer of fluid located between it and the skull. As the resonance from the meditation reaches this area of the head, it starts to move the brain up and down by 0.005 to 0.010 millimeters in a constant motion. And now the whole body starts to vibrate, transferring energy into a frequency of about 6.8 to 7.5 hertz. Itzhak Bentov is quoted in the Gateway document as saying, "This is occurring at a very long wavelength of about 40,000 kilometers, or just about the perimeter of the planet. In other words, the signal from the movement of our bodies will travel around the world in about 1/7 of a second through the electrostatic field in which we are embedded. Naturally, it will go through just about anything: metal, concrete, water, and the fields making up our bodies. It is the ideal medium for conveying a telepathic signal." All of this is to begin to elevate the frequency of the human body so that it reaches a certain point of causing consciousness expansion, which is in tune with the Earth's electromagnetic pulse, which operates at 7.5 hertz. We are conjoining our vibratory field with the Earth's, thus harmonizing with it, and are now able to utilize it as an energy source. This has immense implications for the conscious ability to transcend our limited physical reality. Consciousness and energy. It is known that matter and energy are the same thing. The subatomic particles that our physical world comprises of are spinning energy fields. These fields can be observed as waves or particles. This is all revealed in the study of quantum physics. As McDonald claims, solid matter in the strict construction of the term simply does not exist. The entire human being, brain, consciousness, and all, is, like the universe which surrounds him, nothing more or less than an extraordinarily complex system of energy fields. Holograms. Energy creates, stores, and retrieves meaning in the universe by projecting or expanding at certain frequencies in a 3-dimensional mode that creates a living pattern called a hologram, as understood by McDonald. Our reality is of course made up of all these light waves known as subatomic particles, which are then organized to resonate and create a projection which results in an object, whether it's a tree, rock, planet, or human. Within the document we find that holograms are capable of encoding so much detail that, for example, it is possible to take a holographic projection of a glass of swamp water and view it under magnification to see small organisms not visible to the naked eye when the glass of water itself is examined. To activate or, in effect, to perceive the meaning of a holograph, energy must be passed through the interference pattern generated by interaction between the moving energy and the energy at rest. By holding the frozen interference pattern in front of the coherent light to project the 3-dimensional holographic image. What is stated here is that for holograms to form the energy at rest, which is the picture or program, it must pass through energy in motion like light. Then the hologram is projected. This is like a movie. The film is the information, the energy at rest. The projector is the light, the energy in motion. When the two meet, the hologram is projected, resulting in a seemingly real event. The consciousness matrix. As Project Gateway exclaims, the universe is one gigantic hologram of unbelievable complexity. The human mind is also a hologram, which attunes itself to the universal hologram by the medium of energy exchange, thereby deducing meaning and achieving the state which we call consciousness. As energy passes through various aspects of the universal hologram and is perceived by the electrostatic fields which comprise the human mind, the holographic images being conveyed are projected upon those electrostatic fields of the mind and are perceived or understood to the extent that the electrostatic field is operating at a frequency and amplitude that can harmonize with and therefore read the energy carrier wave pattern passing through it. Contrary to what everyone knows is so, it may not be the brain that produces consciousness, but rather consciousness that creates the appearance of the brain. In other words, the mind or consciousness is the energy at motion. It is the projector, whereas the universal code that is written in our dimension is the film that passes through our mind, thus creating a hologram which we call reality. This is not a new thought. As the document states, in 1967, Alexandra David Neal and Lama Yongden wrote a book entitled Secret Oral Teachings in Tibetan Buddhist Sects, from which the following quote is taken. The tangible world is movement, say the masters, not a collection of moving objects, but movement itself. There are no objects in movement. It is the movement which constitutes the object which appears to us. They are nothing but movement. This movement is a continued and infinitely rapid succession of flashes of energy. All objects perceptible to our senses, all phenomena of whatever kind and whatever aspect they may assume, are constituted by a rapid succession of instantaneous events. Paramahansa Yogananda, the famous Indian guru who helped bring yoga to the United States from the 1930s and onwards, spoke about life being like a movie. He is quoted as saying, "One's values are profoundly changed when he is finally convinced that creation is only a vast motion picture, and that not in it, but beyond it, lies his own reality." As life is projected like a movie, the goal is to get to the light, the source that the movie is being projected from. Part 2. Elevating the Mind. Time-space dimension. At this point in the document, McDonald states, "Up to this point, our discussion of the gateway process has been relatively simple and easy to follow. Now the fun begins." He goes on to explain time, space, and infinity. Physicists define time as a measurement of energy or force in motion. In other words, it is a measurement of change. However, in order for energy to be in motion, it must first be limited in some way within the confines of some sort of vibratory pattern, so that its confinement gives it the capacity for being contained at a specific location which is distinguishable from other locations. Time is energy in motion or in a changing state, like when you wave your hand. That is occurring in time. For something to change or be a part of time, it must also be confined to space, which is described as an individual object within its own individual vibratory field. In Nafusi's article, The Binary Universe and Simulated Reality, we are told that each individual second or movement in time constitutes what is known as the now-time snapshot. We perceive things as moving, but really, we are watching a holographic film of each individual snapshot flip through. We aren't seeing a hand move, we are watching individual snapshots of the hand move from left to right. This is time and space. Now, back to the document, McDonald states, energy which is not confined is force without limit, without dimension. It is infinity. It cannot move because there is nothing beyond infinity, and it is therefore outside of the dimension of time. It is also beyond space because that concept implies that a specific energy form is limited to a specific location and is absent from other locations. But if energy is in the state of infinity, there are no boundaries, no here to differentiate from there. Energy in infinity is said to be completely at rest, and therefore it cannot generate holograms so long as it remains utterly inactive. It retains its inherent capacity for consciousness in that it can receive and passively perceive holograms generated by energy in motion out in the various dimensions which make up the created universe, but it cannot be perceived by consciousness operating in the active universe. Energy in this state of inactive infinity is termed by physicists as energy in its absolute state, or simply the absolute. Between the absolute and the material universe in which we perceive our physical existence are various intervening dimensions to which human consciousness in altered states of being may gain access. Now, this is powerful. What McDonald is saying is that the hologram which we live in is confined to the limitations of the time-space dimension. However, the absolute, or the mainframe of our universe, is where infinity resides because it is in a constant state of rest and exceeds space because it contains all things that have or will happen. It is the database where all knowledge resides. This concept has been described by the ancients as the Akashic Records. This term was popularized by the American clairvoyant Edgar Cayce. His explanation of the Akashic Records goes as follows. The Akashic Records, or the Book of Life, can be equated to the universe's supercomputer system. It is this system that acts as the central storehouse of all information for every individual who has ever lived upon the earth. More than just a reservoir of events, the Akashic Records contain every deed, word, feeling, thought, and intent that has ever occurred at any time in the history of the world. Much more than simply a memory storehouse, however, these Akashic Records are interactive in that they have a tremendous influence upon our everyday lives, our relationships, our feelings and belief systems, and the potential realities we draw toward us. The Akashic Records contain the entire history of every soul since the dawn of creation. These records connect each one of us to one another. The Akasha, a Sanskrit word meaning to denote the primal source from which all things are formed, is the ancient Hindu understanding of Gateway's absolute. Intervening dimensions. Between our mundane world of the time-space dimension and the absolute, there are various dimensions. To reach these dimensions and eventually the absolute, one must elevate their conscious frequency through the stated techniques with practice to escape the body hologram and exit the time-space confinement. In order to achieve this in a practical sense, one must enhance their brainwave output so that if viewed through an oscilloscope, the two brain hemispheres would conjoin and look like a single solid line. Any oscillating wave, such as a brain wave, has 2 points of complete rest. These occur at the beginning and end of each revolution. During these rest periods, for an infinitesimally quick instance, energy enters a click-out phase in which it joins the absolute in the dimension of infinite rest. When we elevate our resonance or meditative frequency brainwave patterns to oscillate at a higher vibration, those wave patterns are now happening faster and causing the click-out phases to become closer to the point where the wave pattern can become a harmonious single line at rest. At this state, we are now in conjunction with the Absolute and have direct access to the source of all, to the universe, to the Creator. Dimensions in between. As McDonald states, our reality within the time-space dimension is neat and predictable, but outside of ours, there are a myriad of various dimensions where fantasy realities can exist. Access to the past and future is theoretically possible when we are outside of the time-space dimension. To enter these realities, we need to master astral projection, or the out-of-body state, to traverse these realms as pure consciousness apart from the false hologram that is our body. I believe that the dream state and other altered states such as the DMT realm might be actual places in our holographic universe that we go to. These in-between dimensions are where some thoughts, dreams, nightmares, fetishes, and all get trapped and exist in some strange realm between time, space, and the absolute. From Big Bang to Taurus. According to Project Gateway, our universe is a torus, a self-contained spiral. In fractal fashion, everything ejects from a center outward, then starts to fold back into its center, causing an infinite loop. They came to this conclusion by realizing that in the universe, smaller processes tend to be mirror images of larger ones. Example, the pattern of electrons around the nucleus of an atom mirrors the way planets orbit their suns, and so on. And so, after observing the way quasars behave, ejecting massive, concentrated beams of energy, our universe too must operate the same way. McDonald and his team concluded that the actual shape of our universe is that what they call a cosmic egg. They named it this after the ancient mystic traditions, which also knew it under that name. Many ancient cultures envisioned the start of our world or universe as hatching from a cosmic egg. Project Gateway states that there is a white hole where everything is produced and flows outward, where it eventually meets with a black hole and wraps back to the white hole. This is a diagram drawn up by McDonald and his team of what the cosmic egg might look like. It is said in the document that because the galaxies north of us are moving away in a fast motion, we are near the top of the egg, getting ready to descend towards the black hole, back towards the beginning of the great river of the universal hologram. Quality of consciousness. Project Gateway states that when energy returns to a state of total rest within the absolute, it returns to the continuum of consciousness in the pool of limitless, timeless perception that resides there. Since consciousness exists quite apart from and outside of reality, beyond the bounds of time-space, it, like the absolute, has neither beginning nor end. Reality has both a beginning and an end because it is bounded within time-space. When reality ends, its constituent energy simply returns to infinity in the absolute. So, when our life here, which is an interactive program projected as a hologram, ends, we return to our form as pure consciousness. Consciousness in perspective. The document goes on to say about the afterlife that since memory is a function of consciousness and therefore enjoys the same eternal character as the consciousness which accounts for its existence, it must be admitted that when consciousness returns to the absolute, it brings with it all the memories it has accumulated through experience in reality. The return of consciousness to the absolute does not imply an extinction of the separate entity which the consciousness organized and sustained. Rather, it suggests a differentiated consciousness which merges with and participates in the universal consciousness and infinity of the absolute without losing the separate identity and accumulated self-knowledge which its memories confer upon it. What it does lose is the capability for generation of independent thought holograms, since that can be done only by energy and motion. In other words, it retains the power to perceive, but loses the power of will or choice. In exchange, however, this consciousness participates in the all-knowing infinite continuum of consciousness, which is a characteristic of energy in the ever-present. Now, this is a lot to unravel. What is being said is that when we pass on from this life or reality, we retain memory from this life, and our real self is also actualized. Our self or consciousness simply returns to its higher self, which has all knowledge and in a sense will remember this life, but to an even greater extent will have an expanded awareness of all things, like waking up from a strange dream where you almost forgot yourself and what life was like. You wake up in a relief, remembering all that you are. With this line of thinking, paranormal and spiritual activity can make sense. If everything that ever was still exists in the absolute but can only enter this reality when it becomes energy and motion again, then maybe that's what magical rituals are all about. When we summon spirits or perform spiritual rituals, we are using sigils and incantations, which are a primal way of producing the same effects as the gateway techniques. In a sense, summoning an ancestor spirit would be like having their hologram projected back into this reality. Part 3, Gateway to Higher Consciousness. Gateway Method. The document refers to the Gateway Tapes, a legendary set of audio training tapes meant to help the participant along with their ascension to expanded awareness to hopefully achieve the astral projection into the other dimensions. The participant is encouraged to start by clearing their mind of extraneous thoughts and to achieve a state of harmonious resonance by uttering a single tone. Coupled with this is the gateway affirmation. The participant is guided to repeat a mantra in which the individual realizes that he is more than merely a physical body and that he deeply desires to expand his consciousness. The participant then proceeds to follow the steps from the tapes, which include the various techniques to achieve this. To begin, the seeker is told to envisage an energy balloon which stretches from the top of the head down to the feet. This starts to deliberately create an energy flow which produces a resonant aura or field around the person. The document states this is also to provide protection against lower energy entities that might be encountered beyond our realm. Although this is simply glanced over in the document, this statement is a profound realization. It is no secret that many religious cultures throughout the world have spoken on the concept of evil or dark entities that reside in an unseen world. These entities could be the shadow beings that are sometimes reported by people when they struggle with sleep paralysis. Famous spiritual and conspiratorial author David Icke talks about the possibility of a race of shape-shifting reptilian beings who project themselves as humans but are hiding their true form by masking it with a hologram. They seemingly use the science of frequency to move in and out of reality by moving beyond the threshold of our sensible perception. The enigmatic emerald tablets of Thoth, which are said to have been written tens of thousands of years ago by an Atlantean priest king, Thoth, then translated by master occultist Dr. M. Doriel in the mid-1900s, proclaim that these entities in fact do exist and that one needs to use strengthened vibratory brainwaves to deliberately dispel these creatures. The book also goes into astral projection and attempts to teach the reader how to achieve this and travel the universe in a light body. Now, a real fascinating thing the document goes into is what MacDonald calls patterning. As it states, this technique involves use of the consciousness to achieve desired objectives in the physical, emotional, or intellectual sphere. It involves concentration on the desired objective. The technique of patterning recognizes the fact that since consciousness is the source of all reality, our thoughts have the power to influence the development of reality in time-space as it applies to us, if those thoughts can be projected with adequate intensity. Patterning is what New Age spiritualism would call manifestation. Gateway proposes that when we enhance our thoughts to intense levels of vibration, we can send those thoughts to the mainframe of the Absolute, and it will read the information, reflect it back as a program to be encoded and projected into our reality. This is like the idea of praying or meditating to get what we want in life. In essence, we are aligning our vibration with the reality that already exists to become in tune with it and live in our manifestation. Problem solving. A practitioner of the gateway methods could also use the all-knowing mainframe of the Absolute to solve problems. The technique is like manifestation. One would meditate on the problem after ascending their consciousness, then upload the desired request into the Absolute. The mainframe would process the request, and in due time, it would project the solution to the participant via a sudden premonition, dream, or actual phenomenon. Einstein used this to some degree. It is said that he would sort of meditate and visualize concepts first before he would put pen to paper. With this process, he was allowing the expanded mind to work out the problems first. Nikola Tesla did the same thing. He would spend hours visualizing new inventions and creations and would then bring those into physical reality. The document also goes into several tools that one could use with their heightened consciousness. One of these is what it calls color breathing, which is essentially recognizing the body's natural processes of healing and being able to induce this process at will. Once recognizing the signs and motions that occur during the body's healing process, the practitioner assigns colors to the healing processes in the mind. After this is mastered, the practitioner simply must meditate on the color and the brain will begin to conduct the healing on command. It also describes the energy bar tool, This is a technique where the individual envisions a cylindrical bar of pulsating light that the participant charges with intense energy in the mind. The bar is then imagined to be placed and touch the areas of the body that need healing. McDonald relates this to the ancient idea of wands and suggests that this was a primal and practical way of ancient healing using the same method. Remote viewing. This is a technique in which the individual uses his astral mind to sense where objects are possibly located in the time-space dimension, such as a lost person or location. This technique was employed by the United States government during the Cold War to spy on the Soviet Union. This is all uncovered in another declassified document titled Project Stargate. Traveling into the past is possible. According to Project Gateway, the participant must envision a huge wheel which represents time, with each spoke being a certain time frame. The universe mainframe understands this request and sends the data to the user to sift through. The data isn't always accurate, but the more masterful the participant is in the overall science of the Gateway techniques, the more in tune they are with the Absolute, thus making their connection to the mainframe clear and intact. McDonald claims that less than 5% of people who take the Gateway experience ever reach this level of ability. As far as traveling into the future, the document says it is possible, but that the individual who has achieved this state has reached a truly advanced level. Conclusion: the ancients were correct. As the Project Gateway document begins to wrap up, McDonald finds it necessary to admit that the spiritual customs of our past knew of this knowledge. They simply expressed it in different terms. He states, unlike yoga and other forms of Eastern mental discipline, Gateway does not require the infinite patience and total personal subservience to and faith in a system of discipline designed to absorb all the individual's energies over most of a lifetime. He mentions that the Gateway method is a practical and scientific way to gain what the ancients might have called enlightenment or communion with God. He goes on to relate the model of the holographic universe to concepts of ancient religions, saying, the Judeo-Christian concept of visible reality as being an emanation of an omnipotent and omniscient divinity who is completely unknowable in his primary state of being is just like that of the Absolute. The Absolute at rest in infinity is a concept straight out of Hebrew mystical philosophy. The description of energy totally at rest in infinity fits the Christian metaphysical concept of the Father, while the infinite self-consciousness resident in that energy providing the motive force of will to bring a portion of that energy into motion to create reality corresponds with the sun. This is so because in order to attain self-consciousness, the consciousness of the Absolute must project a hologram of itself and then perceive it. Finally, our description of the universal hologram, the torus of creation and evolution, is neither new nor original. Its use is found in various stylized representations in virtually every religious system of antiquity. Mystics the world over, it seems, have perceived the universal hologram in the same spiral form and have incorporated the intuitive knowledge in their religious writings from antiquity to the present. These are profound revelations. If the Gateway conclusion about life in the universe is correct, then that means it has always been so, and that the mystics of the past who have ventured into the spiritual world figured this out and tried to express it in their own way. The ancient Greek philosopher Plato spoke about our world or reality being a facsimile of the real world. He proposed a philosophical theory of what he called forms. Essentially, he says that everything in this world is a defective version of its true form, which resides in the unseen world of the real reality. Plato's thinking is that this world is a fake hologram which is being projected from the pure reality of perfect form. It is our duty to actualize this realization and return to our perfect form. Left brain limitations. McDonald admits that our modern physics is merely rediscovering insights that ancient humanity already knew. In our world, we have primarily been viewing reality through the left brain, the cold, calculated mind. The ancients were expressing the knowledge of the world through the creative, intuitive, and holistic right brain. McDonald declares that using the Gateway method to synchronize both hemispheres of the brain would be an advantage for the new world to escape the prison of subjectivity. We could live in a truer world with access to our spiritual selves. Know thyself. The ancient mystical axiom, know thyself, is now proven to be of substance. It was important to the ancient mystics to turn inward first to fully realize what we are individually before trying to make assumptions of what the universe is. By doing so with primal hemi-sync techniques to reach altered states of consciousness, one would have reached self-enlightenment or realization. As McDonald put it, this would seem to be one of the real promises of the gateway experience from the standpoint of its ability to provide a portal through which, based on months if not years of practice, the individual may pass in his search to find self, personal effectuality, and truth in the larger sense. Well, that's Project Gateway, a declassified CIA document that proves we live in a fascinating holographic universe in which we can directly interface with, only when we've taken it upon ourselves to reach the appropriate elevated states of consciousness.